Ichie go ichie.
All right, pop culture portraits. Kanye West this time. This one's for Black History Month. I've got a collection of pop culture figures in basically world society, not necessarily black culture or black society, but what I think is important to note about Black History Month and some of these pop culture figures that I'm going to display over the course of the month is that the cultural impact of these folks, for good or for ill, in this case I think mostly for good, in the case of Kanye West, particularly for how much his music's enriched a lot of people's lives, despite how much of a character he is. I think it's important for people to recognize the value that black and brown folks have in terms of contributing to culture. So I thought I'd share this little sketch. By the way, when I'm doing all these sketches, these pop culture figures, a lot of them are taken from, and I mean directly from, reference. If you notice in the very, very beginning of this, you saw this sort of like these little flashes of images, and you see right now on screen, there's a photograph, and I should say photographs that are pulled from the internet, and you've got maybe like 3 or 4, maybe even 5 pieces. You've got his chain, you've got the Rockefeller medallion at the bottom, you've got the sort of hand placement thing where they're doing that old school, I guess that's what, early 2000s, Rockefeller, that sort of like diamond shaped thing. And then of course the face, which, guys, I've said this a million times in these pop culture videos, the face is the key, particularly the likeness. And if you cannot capture the likeness, there's really no point in doing portraits. Let's be real. So for me, I like to hit all the darkest shapes first. And if you notice, like, you can see kind of like the hair is rendered mostly. You see I'm kind of focusing right now on his eyebrows. You can see sort of the hint of the jaw and the outline. Even the shadows in the ears, you can kind of see that happening. So right now it's me just sort of finding the darkest shapes. I think when you've got, especially when you're working from photo reference or on top of photo reference, as the case may be here, you want to hit all the shadows first. For me, I think what happens when you capture all the shadows is you give the drawing sort of its form. Some people prefer to do the midtones. Some people sort of, like to block in shapes of color, particularly when they're doing a painted or a painterly style portrait. But for him, I thought it best, and for most, I think it's best to kind of capture the darkest shapes first. And getting back to Kanye, I kind of brushed over, his sort of, he's gotten kind of controversial in the last several years. And it's unfortunate because when you think about when he first came out, he's kind of he's kind of like an underling, just a producer, kind of making music and making hits for the Rockefeller artists, including Jay-Z and some of the others. But he was able to kind of, through perseverance, sort of push through and become essentially a cultural icon. And he'll be the first to tell you that he's a cultural icon. He's definitely got some super ego. And I think ego is important, however, as an artist. And what I've noticed is a lot of artists come up to me and they're like, they lack that sort of basic awareness that if you have skill, and you clearly do if you're someone who feels confident enough at least to present your art to someone like me who's considered a professional, then you should have enough sort of self-esteem with your art to be able to push through and push forward. And that's one thing Kanye never lacked. It seemingly never lacked, is self-esteem. I don't know how he was as a kid. I don't know how he was as a young artist, sort of kind of figuring out how to make beats at his house. But if you're in sort of that place where you're preferably trying to grow and advance, you've got to sort of figure out that way to sort of boost your ego. That I think what happens when you have a certain amount of confidence, it allows you to be more experimental. It certainly allows you to kind of push past sort of plateaus with your art. And one thing, again, using Kanye West as reference, again, it's Black History Month, so I'm gonna, like to focus in on black artists and how they've impacted, all of us artists overall. If you focus in on Kanye West, that confidence that he has, it's sort of like this never say no attitude, or don't allow others to define you. Maybe that's the best way to kind of express what I'm trying to say. And again, with me and with pretty much everyone I know who's pretty successful at this, there's a certain level of artistic acceptance that what they do has value. And I want you all to understand that what you do has value. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on the super, super high level of a Kanye West or another famous artist that you are looking to emulate or looking to adapt their style, or better yet, to sort of be inspired by. You don't necessarily have to have that supreme, ultimate, in some ways, cockiness that Kanye has, but you do at least have to have a level of understanding that what you do is, let's face it, impressive to others who don't. And I'm sure if you're an artist in any sort of level, you have people in your life who are really impressed by what you do. It could be family members, it could be friends. And even though you may not be there yet in terms of that high level of confidence, you definitely want to sort of like take in the compliments. I think the negativity is stifling, and it often serves as a sort of a mental hurdle, which let's face it, Kanye may have some mental issues. No disrespect to those who are suffering with those, but he may have some issues. But what he does not lack is a sense of self, and ultimately that's where it's at. So if you want to be really creative and you want to be able to do anything, even stuff like these portraits that I'm showing here, definitely sort of build up that tough sort of artistic skin. And speaking of skin, obviously you can see the photograph here. Let me get back to the art. You can see the photograph here where it sort of bleeds through. Oftentimes when I'm doing these, I'll sort of I'll make the layer more transparent, or should I say the underdrawing, the under reference images, and make them a little less visible, and it allows me to see the line art as I'm rendering. But in this case here, the photographs I was using for reference were so kind of blurry and sort of they lacked the requisite amount of detail I needed to be able to pull out those dark shapes that I use in order to create the line art for these portraits. It's funny, speaking of line art, it's my style, and it's the style of millions of others throughout history, but it's not painterly, and I admire the painterly style. I've said it a million times in other pop culture portrait videos, but for me, I guess it's the challenge of being able to take the photograph and not be able to use the values, the sort of the lights and the darks and the midtones, to create that look of the character that I'm trying to render, or the person that I'm trying to render. I love the challenge of being able to render, and even in this case here, where you see the hands, or even the jewelry, or certainly his face and his facial expressions. Like that to me is maybe it's not an extra challenge to be able to render something using values and using shading, but I like being able to capture this in the end with just lines, literally black on white in this case, on top of those layers of or layer of reference. So if you're apt to do that style, key element again, find the darkest shapes first and make them the heaviest or thickest lines. If you do that, and you can kind of see that here where like I'm actually going back in and adding even more darker shapes. Sometimes I'll get through the whole piece and it'll need a little more depth or a little more punch in certain areas. And then even here you can see I basically put this on a black background, and I did that probably just so I can sort of isolate some of the elements there in the chain. Then I chose to do it maybe on this white background. I thought it was more dramatic and more impactful, and to be honest with you, more fresh, because I was doing so many of these images with a black or a dark background. And I thought just for stylistic reasons, I threw in this sort of sketchy, sort of wispy black shape to really define the hands and the face. And that's it. That's all there is to it. All right. So have confidence in your art. Maybe not Kanye level confidence, but maximum that you can do. All right. So of course you guys know what to do now by now, right? Definitely if you like this video, click the like button, hit subscribe, hit that bell notification so that way you'll know when new ones come. All right, guys. Sketchy go ichie. Live your moment. Happy sketching, y'all. Peace.